So today and tomorrow we'll be talking about the movement for global mental health, and we'll have several perspectives on this effort. Also, I mentioned I wanted to have some of you come up and talk about your own issues you've come across. For those of you who are, currently engaged in field work, I did get 3 volunteers. We have one for today. Shavari, right, is going to be Shadavari. Okay, is going to be sharing in the second half some comments, and then we have Sri Parvati and Shreyas for Saturday, also sharing observations. Is there anybody else that would like to?
Could we discuss our work? Because I have only done my pilot field work. I haven't started my actual field work.
Oh, okay.
Can I present?
Well, if you have something to say, yes. Okay, so we can have you today then, okay? Yeah, we could do, we already have 2 for tomorrow and 1 for today, so it would balance out better. It's not something that needs to be prepared. It can just be off the top of your head. Actually, you tell me after the break.
Yes.
You can decide. But before we move into the movement for global mental health, I wanted to say a couple comments about transcribing. I realized that in the assignment, as it was described to you, you were asked to also transcribe interviews. I'm curious if, I know some people did that. For anybody who transcribed or tried their hand at transcribing interviews, do you have any observations or insights to share about that experience? Yes?
My experience of transcribing has been very time-taking and complex because what in my field experience is that I have been interviewing people with my regional language.
Okay.
So when I sit for transcribing, firstly I have the audio in Assamese, that is the regional language.
Yep.
And then firstly directly hearing the audio and transcribing it into English feels a little bit more difficult. So what I do is firstly I transcribe it into Assamese itself, and then I translate it to English. So this is like a two-way thing that firstly I transcribe it into Assamese and then translate it into English for analysis. So this takes quite a lot of time in my experience. So that is one thing. And then also another thing is that in regional languages there are some words that cannot be directly translated into English. Just, for example, in Assamese there is a concept of the word is like bhal. Bhal literally means good, but then bhal is being used in different contexts by the participants also. So when this bhal is used in other contexts, that context itself cannot be has a direct translation of this particular thing. So there is also one challenge that I faced during transcribing and translation and transcribing.
Yeah, and that's a big issue, yeah. Translation itself is a project that is as big as transcribing and has its own variety of complexities. And I think it's good that you're pointing out the terms in Assamese, because this is something, what anthropologists do more than others is when we're, including in our writing quotations or in our analysis from our translated transcriptions, we always keep some words in the original language that are not easily translatable with then some explanation about why we're keeping those words. Sometimes the linguistic differences have important meanings that need to be preserved. In some other fields, like psychology, is less likely to do this, but I encourage psychologists to also do this. In my work, I ended up writing an article about the changes that people seek and are able to get in their mental health problems, many years ago. And I ended up questioning the notion of, or the vocabulary around cure. In biomedicine and in English, people speak of curing, even though we also have more precise guidelines as to what amounts to improvement and other vocabulary. But in Malayalam, people weren't talking, there was no really, you could say, there was the verb maruga, right? To change is what people use to describe their illness, asukam mario. Right, asukam maram, yeah, marua. It's the verb to change. And mostly people talked about the change they got, or they might say bedam, asukam bedamai, that there was improvement. And so I discussed that vocabulary in this article I did, and the significance, because it had to do with the main point I was trying to make. There's a tendency to talk in terms of this dichotomy of cured and not cured, but actually the local language talks about this more fine point continuum of change that has maybe different possibilities, including the possibility of a positive transformation beyond curing, which I don't know that people intended by their comments, but some people made points like that the result of healing or treatment is not necessarily return to baseline. It can be positive transformation, so you end up at a better place than you were before, your problem started. So that this Malayalam verb maruga, created all these new understandings that I was able to use in making my point. It gave me the insight. It wasn't just a side issue. It was like one of the main issues. So I would say, for those words that don't easily translate, and those words, you might be wanting to preserve them in your translations, and look for maybe differences in terminology that aren't just about subtle differences, but might actually have more profound meanings that you can discuss further. Anyway, transcriptions and translations. That's a big. Are there other observations from transcribing that anybody would like to share?
Sir, with Indian languages, so for me, my interviews were in Marathi, but I have not studied Marathi during my schooling.
Okay.
It is just what I have picked up from my family because we have conversations in Marathi, but I feel the dialects and vocabulary changes a lot. So to pick up on those, because whatever Marathi I have listened to, it is very standard. It is very textbookish,
Okay.
but whatever my demographic participants speak, it's very different. And the dialect is very different, the tone, the accent is very different. So even though you know the language, it's not necessary that you can pick up on that dialect as well. This happens, I think, with every Indian language where it changes even though it's the same language.
Right, okay, yeah, right. That just within the many languages of India, you have many dialects and a difficult, and talk about it in your writing, in your articles. Mention the language, mention the dialects. Sometimes again, this is skipped. I remember I've written in reviewer comments on submissions for journals. Somebody will submit something and it won't even say whether the interviews are translated or what the original language would have been, even though the research is being done maybe in some part of India. And I'm thinking, and I write those comments, I'm thinking this person is probably not an anthropologist, but they can also easily add this information too. But I think it's always part of, like, you discuss whatever your methods section in there somewhere, say interviews were done in whatever language. I speak this language, but informants spoke these various dialects. I did translations. Just make that part of your methods discussion. And I've been transcribing just while I'm here. While I'm here, teaching, even though I'm teaching, I'm continuing to do my work for my research project, and I finally, just yesterday, finished transcribing interviews that I did the last 2 years on the Hearing Voices movement and on open dialogue. But again, and my method was to actually take notes on the interviews and transcribe particular moments that seemed relevant, and if you do that, putting the occasional time marker in your notes and transcription, you can always go back and find more quotes by investigating those sections. So I mean, even though this is a faster method, it's still taking me way too long. But it's all about the workload and what there's time for. So yes, the movement for global mental health and global mental health. I've just put up the page for Vikram Patel, who you've just read. I mean, a piece co-authored by him and several others from the movement for global mental health. You'll notice that he is currently the Paul Farmer Professor and Chair of Global Health and Social Medicine at Harvard Medical School. So they've endowed a chair named after Paul Farmer, and that's where Vikram Patel is now. Before this, he was at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine for a long time, which actually kind of reinforces the point that China Mills makes in her critique about the sort of colonial nature of the movement for global mental health, because the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine was the center of sort of the colonial rollout of biomedical methods among the British colonies. London School of Hygiene, and tropical medicine. It was also where research was done on tropical illness, not to help the lives of people living in tropical countries, but to help the British be able to expand their empire. They didn't want their soldiers getting malaria, or if they did, they wanted to figure out some treatment. So those are some of the things they worked on. Teaching Africans hygiene, was a project that came out of there. So very symbolically to the critics, the movement for global mental health wasn't based just there, but Patel and some others were at that institute. Now, there are a variety of terms floating out there, including the movement for global mental health, and then just the term global mental health. I'll put movement first. So the movement for global mental health is a specific organization led by Vikram Patel, and the piece I've given you, from the British Journal of Psychiatry is just called The Movement for Global Mental Health. He's kind of, declaring and naming the movement in this piece and telling you about its characteristics and its purpose. So it's a specific movement led by Patel, and there's several other individuals who are really significant in the movement. Actually, not so much the co-authors on that piece, but I'm forgetting the name of some of the others, including some of the anthropologists at Harvard University, such as Arthur Kleinman, has been very much, behind this movement. He was the person who originally taught us to deconstruct Western psychiatry, and now at the end of his career, he's trying to expand the use of Western psychiatry, which are not necessarily contradictory things. But
So what's the name of the psychiatrist?
which psychiatrist? Oh, Arthur Kleinman? Yeah, I'll just put that up here. Just off to the side here, Arthur. Well-known psychiatrist and anthropologist. And there's quite a group of psychiatrists, anthropologists now. Like I've mentioned Sushruth Jadhav, several times as well. He's very much a supporter of the movement for global mental health. Sushruth is very much a critic of the movement for global mental health. They come out on different sides of this. Now, so you have this group, and then you'll also see this label, just global mental health, frequently used. And this is used in multiple and ambiguous ways. So if someone's using this phrase, they don't necessarily mean that they're talking about this movement. And actually, Dr. Vasudeo emailed me, with this reference to this volume on global mental health, and asked me my opinion of this. And by coincidence, actually, I was planning to mention that work. In fact, I was sitting there thinking, oh, what is that book that Ross White and Sumit Jain edited? And you asked me about this book. So as an example of this, so the people who use this label use it in multiple ways. Sometimes it's used in a way that it's kind of the same. It's like people using this label are supporting this movement. So one of the readings I've given you for today, the one by Amber Wusic and others on water issues in Bolivia, is from a volume which is cited there in your syllabus called Global Mental Health, Anthropological Perspectives. And that volume is not using this term, but they are supportive of. These are anthropologists trying to sort of help out and move in the direction being led by the movement for global mental health. So they're using that in a way that's similar. But then others have used the term. I'll mention the work that Dr. Vasudeo mentioned to me, the Palgrave Handbook. Oh, let's click. IIT Palakkad came up in my results, so let's click on the IIT Palakkad Library's entry for this. So I guess this means we have it here, right? Or the ebook or something. So the Palgrave Handbook of Sociocultural Perspectives on Global Mental Health also uses the term, though they're more critical of the movement for global mental health. I mean, but then the critics are of various kinds. So they're not like, most critics aren't completely rejecting the movement for global mental health, but they have certain issues with it. And so this book, the editors, their position is that, so their concern about the movement for global mental health is that movement tends to sort of see the global south as having a deficit and a problem that needs to be solved by the global north through more psychiatry, and they think that's overly simplistic, and that's the main critique. And so they also problematize places in the global north as also having problems that need to be addressed. They don't assume that the terrain is, top down north to south. They have a multi-directional orientation, even though they make some of the same points. Some of the contributors make some of the same points as people in the movement for global mental health make about some issues. And then there are several different programs, like postgraduate study programs in different countries. There's quite a few of them in the UK that have the label global mental health, and they have different positions in relationship to the movement for global mental health. So just be aware that the second term can have lots of different meanings, and it's not usually obvious. In fact, the editor here of this book, Ross White, I met him at a conference. I'm trying to remember which one now, actually, but and I remember him telling me about this project he was working on, where he was trying to get this more nuanced approach to global mental health. And at one point, I created a conference panel for the ISPS meetings. Remember ISPS was that group I mentioned earlier, the International Society for Psychological and Social Approaches to Psychosis. The international meetings that were held in Liverpool in the UK one year, I organized this panel with Ross White, this editor, and I would like to say a few other people. We had 7 people, but 3 ended up showing up, actually me and Ross White and another person, Stefan X. And the panel was on the movement for global mental health, which is something that the ISPS people didn't really seem to know much about, but I was convinced they would want to know more about it and would want to have some voice in the debates over this, because ISPS tends to be kind of sort of internally focused. People will present papers on their patient. Or issues that are really sort of internal to their own country or just focused on the West. They're just sort of assuming the world of the discussion is Europe and North America, and they were quite concerned, as they are in many ways critics of the biomedical model. They were concerned to hear, oh well, but this model is while it's being challenged in the West, it's being exported to the rest of the world, and so they, at least I guess, got to hear that. Sumit Jain is worth knowing too. He does medical anthropology, psychological anthropology. He's taught a Gyan course at IIT Hyderabad, and has done very good work on mental health in India. He's based in the University of Edinburgh in the UK. And the other 2 are also medical anthropologists, David Orr and Ursula Reid. Also, this is all a UK-based group. So let's say a few words about the piece by Patel and co-authors, which also is up here, the Movement for Global Mental Health. So this is, obviously on the side of advocating for the movement by the leader of the movement. So what is this movement about, or what are some of the, this is a very short piece, but some of the points that you think that they're trying to highlight as they're sort of coming out to the public. Here's our movement.
Trying to close the gap between people who have mental disorders and people who are actually treated.
Okay, the treatment gap, yeah, that's a central concept to them, that there's a big gap between the number of people who have these sorts of problems and the availability of people to treat that. And that term, that concept is a contested issue in the debates over this. What else is highlighted? Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead.
Abuse related
Oh,
mental health conditions
right.
and pitching it as a violation of human rights.
Okay, right. The abuse issues meted out on people who have mental health problems, right? Yeah, and
Yeah, I was saying the same thing. The human rights of the people with mental disorders and making sure that they have that rights and they are aware of that rights and they're not being, those rights are not being abused. Also, they kind of say that they have 2 fundamental principles. One is human rights and another one is the evidence on effective treatments that are given to these mentally ill individuals.
okay, right. Okay, yeah, right. Good. Yeah. Human rights. That's this abuse issue, and effective treatments. Effective evidence-based treatments. That's a phrase they're using. Evidence-based is also this broadly used term. I guess you probably all familiar with. To me, it's a curious term. Who is it the person? Who is it that advocates for, lack of treatments based on lack of evidence, and who offers treatments that doesn't offer evidence? It's still the issue of whose evidence, what evidence is most convincing. Everything has evidence, so everything is evidence based. It's kind of we need a better term for what we're really talking about. What else? Anything else anybody noticed that? Mm-hmm.
Doesn't adequately represent the indigenous systems of medicine that is on and Another thing that I felt was that maybe we also read the other article on the Bolivian water.
Yeah.
Doesn't adequately also represent the sociological factors like poverty and other things into account? I feel.
Okay. What doesn't adequately represent that?
The whole article, when the
You mean the Patel article? Oh, so you're sort of critiquing the article, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah. There's really no addressing of indigenous, methods of dealing with these problems, and then poverty. I guess I'm sure you're right that he doesn't address that here, but he does in other publications. He does highlight that as an important factor, and that those are issues.
But I felt, although he does mention human rights, like he said, it's very keen. Like the way that he's talking about, it's not going into the indigenous population or other social issues. It's just human rights. Or maybe it's just because we have only read this article.
Yeah.
I think
treating and diagnosis is for
it's very like
Is-
the pathway is very clear. It's
Okay.
straightforward. It's
Okay.
not going into other arenas.
So
which
it's-
is required to have a wholesome understanding.
Right. So you're sort of saying it's too clear. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I think that's actually a good critique. That right, and we shouldn't say these ideas like human rights. You don't want to say, oh well, let's make it murky. Of course, it's a clear thing that everyone values, but it's defining that and accomplishing that can be very difficult issues and very controversial. And the path, a clear path is often.
This looks very ideal. This looks like
Okay.
something that could work in a very ideal world, I guess.
Okay, so it's an idyllic approach. Okay, great. Other yes. Uh-huh.
What Donna is saying, I'm on the other side probably a little bit. It's like appears that it is mainly a platform for people to unite so that they can advocate for mental health, especially in the global south, like an alternative to the global north. And it's not clear that they're talking about medicines or that kind of treatments, or whether for or against them.
Right.
And what they're trying to actually fight for in terms of rights of the patient, persons with mental illness, what are they actually focusing on? And like if I were to compare it with the hearing voices work that we're doing,
Right.
would it be in sync? Would it say, no, this is not evidence-based, or how do they?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. In fact, I mean, there are actually scientific journal articles on hearing voices, movements, and benefits. So it would be probably a question of is the evidence convincing to global mental health people? But I mean, I would say that's a different movement. The hearing voices movement is really coming from the peers. Coming from the patients, as it were, the service users, and the movement for global mental health is coming from the professionals. Which I think is an important distinction. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Sir, what I thought was creating evidence base should really be an issue with us, because many times these concepts and the ideas that we bring forth, they are one-sided. For example, they will focus on curative aspect but not care.
Okay.
Which hearing voices will do.
Okay.
But we cannot offer cure. Then just medicines become big, biomedical aspect. That is what we like people.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's a good point too. And actually you're mentioning medicines, Tej mentioned that too. So you don't really see much talk about pharmaceuticals here. I think that's intentional. I mean, I think from the beginning they were very aware that they would be accused of being just sort of an organization that creates new market opportunities for global pharmaceutical companies. But their interventions do include pharmaceuticals, but they prioritize, they have a lot of interventions. So they have a lot of interventions, I should say what that means. So different people from the Movement for Global Mental Health have done feasibility studies and then actual implementations of many interventions for mental health in many countries in the world. India has been the most common site for these. And then they publish articles showing, we tried this intervention. Most of them do not involve pharmaceuticals, at least the part of the intervention that's focused on. Like they'll be like a psychoeducation intervention in some place in Maharashtra. And they'll say, here's our protocol, here's what we did, here's the results. Hey, it's, which are always positive, and then so we should scale this up is always the conclusion. And so there is but the meds are there sometimes. I think there's an effort not to highlight the meds, not let them lead the way, and to show that they're focusing on other things and not just that. But they're all based on psychology, they're not based on indigenous ideas of concepts, but they claim to be open to that. The movement for global mental health individuals have been receptive to the critiques, and they've even discussed the importance of including indigenous healers in their methods. But then they do that, and then the critics of that is, well, they employ them only as referral sources to psychiatry. So it's a complex and nuanced situation that has many different aspects to it. And Patel also says in this piece, Patel and co-authors, that they're inspired by the HIV/AIDS movements, which have been very effective at expanding care and the medications necessary for that movement. The critique I would have of that claim is that the HIV/AIDS movement, the activism there came from the patients. And the movement for global mental health is not coming from the patients. It's not people with diagnoses that say, we want this. It's mental health professionals. It's the psychiatrists and academics. If you look at who's in there's their table 1 from the article that shows you who the participants are. The category that has the most participants they are clinical practitioner or care provider and academic researcher. So it's coming from the professional side. It's not coming from a grassroots movement of demand. So I think it's a little bit problematic when at the end of the article, the authors talk about their movement being a social movement. What is a social movement? If it's coming mainly from elites, is it a social movement? I mean, they're social people too, but we tend to usually think of a social movement as something that's coming from the bottom up, or maybe somewhere in the middle, outward.
Another thing that got my attention was how it mentions lower and middle income countries as they want to focus on.
Yeah.
But if you look at the map that is given there,
Mm-hmm.
India has representation, but other than that, it's mostly the US and the UK that has.
Even Europe having high percentage.
Yeah. So if you are looking at the countries, it's very scattered around, except for those two main dominant presidents.
That's right. I mean, and it's these data are spun different ways by the different positions, so that people endorsing the movement say, look, we have representation all over the world, and then the critics will say, yes, but it's lopsided towards Europe and the US, but India's representation is quite large, yes. I mean, really, and India is like a major center, and then a lot of the people with Indian names are in the movement are in North America and Europe, so yeah, like Vikram Patel, and there's a number of others as well. But there are African advocates. There are people from all of these other countries, and so and they point out that there are people whose, or actually, the table has one term I just wrote down in my notes from the actual text. They have the term people affected by mental disorder, make up 1/4 of the members. So that's family member or person affected by mental disorder on this table. So they're like, oh, look, there's that representation. So, but then the comeback is, yes, but it's mostly professionals and academics. So these things can go two ways, and you should decide what you think it means. The movement has had a lot of very positive media coverage. More so several years back when this was really being rolled out to the public. And, and how could it not? I remember seeing coverage in the New York Times. It just, it's only heroic, Heroic doctors are, going around helping the poor, save them from, the demons that haunt their minds. And, and if you're a critic, you can't help but just feel like you immediately misunderstood. Like, no, the critics are not against global mental health. That's a good aspiration. But how do you do that? And how do you define the things involved? Is there's many ways to approach this. Now let's move on to discuss the piece by Wutich, set in Bolivia. Now this is from an edited volume that, as I mentioned earlier, is basically, sort of going along with the movement for global mental health. Hearing that call by Patel et al. And trying to address what anthropology can contribute to this effort. So this is in a way the pro movement for global mental health book from anthropologists. I scanned the contents page as well. Did I scan the whole thing? No, I just scanned the first of the contents pages. So you can see a little bit more of some of the other works that are in here. And I thought this was an appropriate article. Something that makes the point that regardless of some of the claims by Patel, it's hard to find fault with this case. It seems like it's pointing out something quite important having to do with mental health and conditions of poverty. So what are some of your takeaways from these co-authors and their field work in Bolivia? Oh, actually, sorry, before we do that, I mentioned I'm not keeping up on this. I want to make sure that we're also looking at the parts of the world that we're discussing. Cochin, no, Cocha. You just add an A and suddenly it jumps from Cochin to Cochabamba. Cochabamba, Bolivia. So you have a little photo of that, which looks like it could be any city. You can stay in a hotel for 8,599 rupees. So let's zoom out. So this is from sort of the lowlands of Bolivia, or lower. Some of you may know that the capital is La Paz, which is the highest capital city or highest large city in the world, highest in terms of altitude, or way up in the Andes. Actually, I guess Cochabamba, maybe I'm thinking of another city. There's another, maybe Sucre, but there's the lowlands of Bolivia here, some of which is Amazonian, and then the highlands, which is way up high in the Andes, high altitude areas. So here we see Cochabamba and more of a map of South America with Peru coming into view, and then Brazil over here on the other side, Argentina below. Okay, so there we are, Cochabamba in South America. So, and I guess to add, they've shaded it to look kind of brown. It's highland, and it's also high desert. So, important context, which he also mentions. There's not a lot of rain, but there are seasons in which it does rain more heavily, and they do try to do what they can do to capture that rain. So what are some of your takeaways? What are some of the insights or intriguing points
I
you
think
observe?
this article is very interesting,
Hmm.
and this water scarcity, it may look like one small problem in the society,
Yeah.
but the author connected it with the various things. She connected with the social exclusion, poverty, state failure, medicalization of poverty, then poor hygiene, and economic inability, everything. So this is one small things, but it's connected. So even in a society with small problems, which cannot deal with medicalizations, and it needs keen interest. It's really the way she connected everything. It's very interesting.
Okay, and you've connected it well too. You know, there's a good list of all the issues exactly that she brings in. Yeah, very, very much so. Yeah, it seems like a small thing, but you know, it's one issue, one item, but it's water. You know, which is so central, you know, to all human endeavor. You just don't get anywhere, you know, without that. I mean, we may be suffering in excess right now in this time in Palakkad, though. What are other observations from? Yes.
As she said, it kind of shifts her gaze to the dominant biomedical models of disease to something very pertinent like water, which is also like a social and like a determinant of the quality of life itself. So another thing that I wanted to say is that in this context, water becomes more than just a resource. It attains like a quality of a social entity in itself, which also determines the quality of life and like also like it becomes a source of dignity itself in a way. So that's what I
Right.
wanted to
Okay.
say.
Right. A social entity in itself. Yeah, that's good. That's sort of also contemporary theory. You know, the non-human actor. Yeah, dignity. Right. I mean, that's a big part of it too. You know, the shame and the stigma of having to ask to borrow water is is a mental stress. I mean, but as she points out, all of these experiences, all these negative affect experiences, are normal reactions to lack of water. They aren't, necessarily something that comes from an individual psychopathology.
What is life?
Yeah, actually, that's true. That is a saying. That's actually, that would have been a good header to have at the beginning of the article. And yeah, and actually to follow up on something you mentioned, Satya, like she brings up the medicalization of poverty issue, and what sort of solution, given that possible, problematic solution, does she suggest? Or could you elaborate on medicalization of poverty?
Yeah, she comparing many other countries also, in Mexican also, these people, this malaria and all, they were affected.
Mm-hmm.
So they were, people are not treating them, people treating them, making them as a social exclusion. But though they are not on face, they are not saying anything, but this social exclusion was the times. But at the end of the times, like it is always seen as a medical issue. It's a malaria, it's things. But towards the end, it is something where the state failures to eradicate these poverties or these water issues and everything.
Okay. And also she gives an example from the work of Nancy Shepherd Hughes from Brazil. Yeah.
So what I understand is they are trying to treat a person as coming with certain symptoms like maybe fatigue or different kinds of physiological problems to a medical practitioner, and they are trying to treat the symptoms of it without going to the cause. So the case of Brazil, the doctors counseled the urban poor and they were trying to get them to take the psychiatric medication for their issues without understanding the root cause was hunger. So they were forced to pay for the medications, and they are already poor. They are trying to allocate the little money that they have to buy medicines and not just have proper food. So that is how medicalization of poverty comes as far as I understood.
Okay, right, exactly. They were coming to doctors with nervousness and tremors, which turn out to actually be from hunger, right? And but the doctors sort of are using the scenario like, what is wrong with this person's body? There's a medication that can stop those symptoms. Yeah. So it ends up being what some have called pills for poverty. It's sort of a way that this medicalization of poverty critique has been phrased in some cases. And so she wants to avoid that. The solution should not be, correcting the body of the individual suffering from these issues. How does she put it actually? So she says, when poverty is medicalized, and I'm here on the left, the bottom paragraph on the left, and poverty is medicalized, the purses of the poor are empty to pay for costly medicines and treatments without attending to the root causes of their distress. To avoid this kind of injustice, it is important to understand that the best cure for emotional distress caused by poverty is to change the system that produces it. And then she does discuss some programs that seem to have been effective in getting the state to provide more water, and leaves us on a hopeful note of interventions to increase access to water as ultimately the solution. Sort of finding a non-medical solution to this issue.
So I just like to add some insights from my experiences.
Yeah.
So my research is on migrants who are from drought-prone areas, and it initially started from my family being from that drought-prone area of Maharashtra, and then my father migrated for better opportunities. But my father's side of family and my maternal family still lives there. So when I first went for field assessment, I was supposed to live at my father's uncle's place, and my mom was like, don't live there, you just visit and then you come back. And then I asked why. So she said, there is water shortage, we don't want to burden them. So I think it seeps in so much on a daily basis also. And another example was, I asked my mom, like, all our relatives stay there. When my dad retires, would you like to go back? And then my mom said, I don't have the strength to fetch water every day because I'll be old, so I don't want to go back. So even though all our relatives live there, my mom still doesn't want to go back to her own people because of water scarcity. And another example that I could pick up from my fieldwork was how water scarcity affects what people eat as well, because most of my participants come from extremely poor social backgrounds. So they told me that they either eat bajra because they don't have money to buy meat, so they never make roti because it needs more water compared to
They eat bajra?
dough, so it needs more water compared.
Millet?
Bajra is
Millet?
It is a kind of millet.
Okay.
So it needs more water to knead the dough, and also roti, like wheat roti, needs oil to cook. So they don't have money to buy oil. So I think it seeps in so much even for daily life practices as well. And another example would be, this is another example from Maharashtra, not my geographical demographic, but areas surrounding Mumbai. There is a district called Palaghar where there is a lot of water scarcity, and like people in their 40s are marrying another wife. So now they have two wives, and the concept of water wives is coming up, so that they have a wife just to fetch water.
Wow.
So these women don't have the legal rights of a wife, but also it is observed that these women are widows or those who have been abandoned by their husbands. So they have been kind of taken into shelter of these men, but they don't enjoy any legal rights.
Okay, wow, that's interesting. Yeah, water wives, a new term. I've not heard that before. That's quite interesting, yeah. And just the simple things like socializing, visiting family, and the burden that they may cause because of water. That's something I'd never never imagined. That's quite interesting, those observations. Actually, regarding the millet, this I think is a really interesting footnote. I just recently was teaching this excellent ethnography by Bhrigupati Singh, who was at Ashoka University. He keeps moving around. He was in the US, and then he was at Ashoka University, and he's just taken this position in London at SOAS that focuses on, well, mental health. I don't know if they use the phrase global mental health, but it's a mental health focused faculty hire there, and though that's not actually the focus of this particular book, but in this poor region of Rajasthan, water is also a huge issue. And he tells this very interesting story about how people traditionally ate millet. The kind of the breads and cereals they ate with their foods were millet, but with the Green Revolution, people were turned to growing wheat and then eating food with, chapati, roti, and also, I guess, occasionally rice. But the problem with that, the Green Revolution itself is an important story, I think, that people should know about if you don't know about already, that changed agriculture and created more inequality. But it was done in the name of, saving everyone, like a lot of heroic tech interventions. But he points out the Green Revolution resulted in a transition to growing wheat instead of millet. But along with that went a fetishization of the chapati, like that was the trendy, conspicuous item to eat. If you would be proud to eat chapati, but ashamed if your family could only eat millet. Not that either one is inherently more tasty than the other, but with the Green Revolution came the sort of a commoditization and the developing of consumer desire for the foods that went with that. But the big problem, though, is the wheat was taking up the groundwater. And there's a groundwater shortage because of that. The millet was able to grow only on the rainwater that they got. So if they were to go back to millet, it would solve the problem of the groundwater shortage that's a big source of poverty, right, in that area. And when I was in Rajasthan a few weeks ago and went to Udaipur, my wife and I went to a millet restaurant. It was a millet-based restaurant that was on this main road to the city palace, and one of their purposes is to bring back millet, and so you could order all these different dishes where millet was. So I had this, this sort of lentil curry thing with a few other items, when these millet sort of buns that were sort of very dense, and then you'd break those up and mix them with the curries, and it's very good. I mean, if you haven't tried millet-based cuisines, it's and I actually started cooking millet at home. After reading Bhrigupati Singh's book, I actually went to our local store where you can get millet, which costs more than wheat because it's being brought back and now it's not as broadly available. But I think that bringing back millet is a solution to a lot of water problems. It grew naturally in many of the arid parts of India, and you don't need irrigation to grow millet. So, so water is a particular thing, and one of the things Vucic and all say that when we talk about poverty and mental health and how the two are related, although that itself is debated, it's poverty can mean many things, and that water is a particular item that they're trying to focus on in unpacking the issue of poverty and how it relates to mental health.
So, this picture that you can actually dug up about anything that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, I forget what that means. I think it may have been attributed to the local, the local protective deity, who is called Tucker Babu or something like that. He discusses poverty and what makes life meaningful for people, and he does that often in terms of it says spiritual and material striving, so he considers both of those things, and shows us how the poor aren't just poor in the sense of suffering, pitiable subjects, but that they actually have, sort of vital lives and many positive things in their life. It's a really good analysis of what poverty means and what the quality of life is that I highly recommend.